farmers market. We have all kinds of amazing food access programs. We have children's gardens and farmer and school programs at the Outer Cape Elementary Schools, Provincetown, Truro, Wellfleet, soon to be Easttown Elementary too. And I'm also the farmer at the library here. We have the children's garden that we run a program every Tuesday afternoon at 3:30. So if you know kiddos, please come along. And this is a wonderful program that we run every year, January through June, with funding from the Massachusetts Department of Agricultural Resources. We're able to host these incredible workshops, bringing in local chefs and highlighting local food and local farmers. So today we have Garrett Smythe.
Hi.
Yay, Garrett. Last year we did an amazing mushroom program. If you weren't here for that, we do have recordings, just phenomenal. This month, Garrett is going to be highlighting pea shoots. So a sister program that we have, this is the Harvest Highlight series, and then we have this Harvester Highlight where every month Sustainable Cape is able to purchase $425 worth of a crop from a local farmer. Then we take that food, it might be local eggs, this month it's pea shoots, other months it's mushrooms, carrots, turnip greens, garlic. We take all that food and we bring it to 3 community kitchens so that the community kitchens can use that food in their food programs and feed the community. So Sustainable Cape, our mission is to really celebrate local food while also educating about the health of our bodies, our community, and our environment. So please, if you haven't already, be in touch, put your email, stick around and have a conversation. We have a lot going on, and we also love to collaborate and we love participation. So there's all kinds of opportunities for here. So Garrett, awesome Garrett, he's been the last 2 decades. He's been learning how to cook. Yeah. So he started in 2004 at the Wicked Oyster. He has worked in a variety of settings in New York City, in San Francisco, in Boston, and now he's really psyched, and so are we, that Cape Cod is his home with his wife and his 3 kids and his dog. Mm-hmm. And he was the chef and co-owner of the Sunbird for 6 years. He was the head chef of the Pheasant for the last couple of years. He's got really exciting plans happening here on the Outer Cape, which I'm going to let him talk about, but we're super excited to see what Garrett does next. So please come with your questions. This is a conversation with Garrett, so feel welcome to raise your hand, ask questions, stick around and be in touch, and thank you so much for being here.
Hey, Garrett Smythe. As Sarah said, last year they asked me to teach a class on mushrooms. I've been working with Uli, who's a local mushroom grower, mushroom farmer, which I always considered it an honor to work with this product and down for Pheasant, and yeah, just this idea of helping the community understand how to use the abundance of foods around us, although at this time of year it might not feel like it's so abundant. And through the course of that class, I brought up a couple of things like preservation, pickling, drying, this type of stuff, and fermenting. So Sarah had said it would be cool if we were able to maybe do something on that, because I know a lot of people have a lot of questions about that. So I just want to start off with, I am not the expert on pickling or preservation or fermenting or all these things. I came to these methods. I was working in these high-end kitchens, and there is a lot of beautiful product coming through the door, and in this idea of the high expectations of the diner and the high cost, there's a lot of waste, and it just seemed like there was something wrong with throwing away that much of the tomato, or this, or this idea of fresh, and so stuff didn't last over a night and you just pitch in. And at the same time, I do not want to disparage that experience in any way, because I learned so much, and my love of this industry and seeing a way forward as a chef, as a viable career, like all came through those kitchens and those mentors. So it was just something I stuck in the back of my head. And then, you know, it kind of has become in vogue, I would say, over like the last 10 years. There's been like an explosion of interest in ferments. And, you know, it's this whole idea. So I was an anthropology major, 4-year school. Of course, then I threw that degree away, said I'm never getting that again, and started cooking. But as an anthropology major, you begin to understand the connections between people and food, cultures and food, and you can learn a lot about a people or whatever through food. And you also come to this understanding that everybody preserved. Every culture has their preservation methods. And there's all this knowledge that is locked away in the histories and in the grandmas and the grandpas and the flavors of these different regions. And so many of them are based on this idea of like, how do we make it last longer? And that's really like the byproduct of all this. The idea is, yes, like to preserve the food, but really it's, if it didn't taste good, we probably wouldn't keep doing it, you know, in today's day and age where we have refrigeration and we have all these other ways, these modern ways of preserving things. And there's, you know, the reason that we still don't feed duck isn't because we need to preserve duck and fat, it's because it's delicious. Like, so anyway, when I moved out here and had the opportunity to be the chef and owner, part owner of Sunbird, I got to understand the business side of restaurants very well. And that is a restaurant that has, does not have the highest price point. You know, it's the very, you know, their breakfast, lunch, it's much lower, quote unquote, check average. And so the idea that we would be throwing away stuff, you know, becomes even more imperative not to do that. And then I also have the opportunity to begin to get to know the local farmers around here. Joshua Schiff, who's the head farmer down at CBI Farm in Brewster, has really been a godsend for me and the people who work with him. And then, yes, getting to know people like Uli. And then my father-in-law is a shellfisherman, and, you know, my brother-in-law is a scalloper. And, you know, like, so this idea that I would throw away the work, that their work, you know, when I'm looking you in the eye and I'm shaking your hand, I mean, I'm kind of accountable to you in a different way than when the food's just coming off of the truck and, you know, the bag's being opened and it's being poured into a container, that type of thing. So, so Sunbird allowed me to begin to delve into these different preservation methods. And so today I thought that, you know, what I would do is just, I picked pickling and fermenting, and we'll kind of just talk about that real quick. And I'll show you some things. And then I'm going to do some kimchi, and then we'll see if we have time for, I made like a little pea shoot, granite, granita, you know, because freezing actually was, you know, traditionally a very important way of preserving food as well, especially in the higher latitudes. So we'll see where we get to. If you guys have questions, please feel free to ask. And yeah, I got really lucky. So to allude what Sarah alluded to, I am in the middle of my previous job at the Pheasant, and yeah, I am in the process of buying the Winter Oyster Wall Street. So maybe it's like 20 years learning how to cook, and then having the opportunity to come back to the place where I fell in love with restaurants, where I fell in love with this, and where it first kind of dawned on me that you could do this professionally. I do have some partners, and yeah, I mean, we're excited. We have a long way to go. The deal isn't technically done. You know, we're still waiting to close. There's some stuff, but everything is lined up, and now it's just kind of, so this season, I'm not sure exactly when, and there's a lot that goes with that. So this is like kind of a nice little respite for me from the stress of trying to get a restaurant open and get it staffed and all that, to connect with why I'm doing the restaurant in the first place, which is I love cooking and I love all the connections that are made when we do this. And yeah, so the first thing is pickles, and well, pickles and ferments. And so what I'd like to, my understanding is how I define the two. A pickle is something that you do with vinegar. Okay, so pickle is vinegar based. That is not how, I mean, there are many different definitions of pickle. I mean, you can, some people consider pickles ferments. I mean, a dill pickle is technically a ferment. So what's the difference? I mean, Vinegar is the product of bacteria. Fermentation is the product of bacteria. It's and different bacterias. So, but for me, when I talk about pickle in my kitchen, I'm talking about something that we take vinegar and then we, in one way or another, dilute it out to create a pickling solution, and then we pour that over whatever we want to pickle preserve. So, yeah, I've got, like some fresh vegetables here that are all pretty much represented in pickles over here. And so I guess the first thing is when you're pickling, a bunch of different factors come into play, and it's the size of your fridge, it's the size of the vegetable, it's how you're going to use it, it's all these things. So you can pickle things whole, but just understand it's going to take a lot longer for it to preserve. Once it's in the liquid, once it's in the brine, as long as it stays submerged in the brine, it'll be okay. So, yeah. It'd be nice if there's music in the background. Maybe we can work on that for next time. But yeah, like this is a local cauliflower that, I pickled last November. Okay, and I just pickled it whole. The reason I pickled it whole is when you're short-staffed, okay, but you need to preserve this stuff, this is the fastest way. And also because I'm in a restaurant kitchen, I have very large containers where I can hold massive amounts of things in their whole state, and then pour them over brine, and then slowly let the vinegar do its thing, and then come back to it down the road when I'm ready to create a dish with it. And you can drain it and then begin cutting it down into smaller pieces. With cauliflower, I usually like to just kind of go around, and it'll kind of begin telling you where it wants to be cut. The florets are essentially bite-sized in and of themselves. You're just kind of going around. Yeah, if you see anything that's like, discolored or a little beat up, ideally, you'd get rid of it beforehand. But the beauty of vinegar pickle is not much can live in the acidic environment of like a vinegar pickle. So just take that, but this is, kind of like my other point. It's like, if you were at home and you don't have, and here's the other thing, all right, even this stem here, all right, you could trim this down and it would be delicious. So it's this idea of like beginning to like open your mind to like, don't just throw things away to throw things away. Like, give it a taste, all right? And then if you don't like how it tastes, yeah, then throw it away. But also I have too that there are times where things initially aren't exactly where I want them, but we have these different, ingredients that we can use to kind of like continue to round out flavor. More salt or sugar or vinegar or oil. So you can begin to like, cooking is a process of tasting and paying attention. And as you continue to like accumulate experiences with foods and flavors, and you have this like little memory bank, and you're paying attention, you remember, it's like, I taste this and it's like, what would go well with this? Or if you've done your research, you begin to see these like commonplace, like these combinations of flavors, curry and cauliflower. So we could sit there and do a curry cauliflower pickle. We could make a pickling solution, put curry powder into it, and pour that over a cauliflower. Now you have a spiced cauliflower thing. So like, it's infinite as far as how many flavor combinations you can go, and it's what you like. Like that's the thing. Not everybody likes the same spices, this and that. I mean, and some spices can be more aggressive and some are more subtle. And but for the most part, dried spices work very well in pickles. Fresh things like herbs, leaves, things like that, they're a little more volatile. And so you don't always know how they're going to fully like present themselves into something. So I usually don't have like fresh herbs or like fresh things besides what I'm trying to pickle in my pickling solution. And yeah, but spices, coriander is a favorite of mine. Usually I toast the seeds beforehand, toast the spices beforehand to start to release some of the essential oils, and then put that into a pickling solution and then pour it over. Another consideration when you're pickling things is do I hot pickle something or do I cold pickle something? And, you know, at the end of the day, you can kind of come down to what you're trying to achieve. But from my perspective, the way I've always done it is, if I wouldn't eat it raw, I don't cold pickle it. I hot pickle it. Okay, and things that I would eat raw, I cold pickle. And usually things that you eat raw are also a little bit more you know, tender, or it's like if you pour hot pickling liquid over peaches, or if you pour hot pickling liquid over tomatoes, they're going to disintegrate. And it's not that you won't have a delicious thing that you could use, you know, like if you have like an open mind to it, but you're not going to be pulling out a solid pickled peach at that point after it's been hot pickled. It's just going to kind of go to mush. And so it's probably better in a salad dressing, or it's better to, you know, as a marinade or something like that, which is totally fine. But if you were hoping to have like a solid pickled peach, you're going to want to cold pickle that. So, and some things are kind of in the middle, but like red onions, hot pickle, okay? And cauliflower, hot pickle, all right? Yes, technically you could eat, you know, and this is the thing, like, but when you, the other consideration you need to make too is hot pickling speeds up the pickling process. Cold pickling takes a lot longer. So you need to kind of set aside more time to, you know, for the pickling to fully infuse into the vegetable or whatever. And if you try to cold pickle a whole cauliflower, it'll take a long time. All right. So you know, these are the factors that you begin to like go into considering when you're just like, all right, I'm trying to pickle something. What am I trying to pickle? How am I trying to pickle it? When do I need it by? All that type of stuff. So yeah, cauliflower, onion. So over here, I've just got a pot. I just want to give you guys like a simple ratio that I use for pickling. And this is the other thing. I mean, just as there are an infinite amount of cooks, technically there could be an infinite amount of pickling ratios, this and that. It comes down to, once again, like what you're doing. What am I trying to achieve? So I usually use a 3-2-1 ratio. So 3 parts vinegar to 2 parts water, 1 part sugar. So I have a 1.5 cups of vinegar here. You can also weigh. This is apple cider vinegar, and this is another thing that goes into it. I mean, there's like so many different kinds of vinegars, and so what kind of vinegar you're using, you know, you need to consider how that's going to play out. I mean, there's rice wine vinegar, there's cider vinegar. A lot of times when I'm pickling in very large batches, I try to keep things as neutral as possible, and I do that with white distilled vinegar. And white distilled has no flavor because the other thing is that the byproduct of pickling is the liquid, which some people can say is, you know, is a shrub. Some people just call them vinegar. Some people would like drain this liquid off of these pickled red onions right here and call that red onion vinegar, okay? Or, you know, they call this carrot vinegar. And if I had cumin in here, if I had coriander in here, you know, like a carrot, cumin, coriander vinegar. So there's some really awesome books back here, librarians kind of pull out. And one of them for sure, like the preservation kitchen there on the side, that was like partly responsible for helping me, you know, develop my understanding of how all these things can be used in a bunch of different preparations. And the idea is like, yeah, now we're beginning to build this pantry. You're beginning to build this larder. Instead of going to the store and getting, you know, pre-made dressing, what we can now do is take the liquid and a little bit of olive oil or a little bit of chili oil, and we can make a little dressing for our salad. And it's just this idea of like nothing's getting wasted now. And I'll make an example. I'm going to put a little dish together here in a little bit, kind of like put this all together. To bring it back to this pickling liquid ratio. And I might just,
could you repeat the ratio, please?
yeah, 3-2-1. And I actually, and so 3 parts vinegar, 2 parts water, 1 part sugar, which I haven't added here. And then it gets a little dicey on the salt. I say a 1/4 part salt. But that, depending on the size of the batch that you're making, a lot of times I'll just season it with salt, season it with taste. So just kind of like rounding up the flavor. This, I don't know how to use. I thought I did. I'm going to keep this up back here. And So the idea is that I'm taking vinegar, water, sugar, salt. At this point, you could add your toasted spices, whatever else you're putting in there. You're just trying to bring it up, dissolve the sugar and the salt. And then, yes, if we're hot pickling something, you bring it up to a boil and pour it over so that it cooks it, right? If we're cold pickling something, one second, just so I finish this train of thought. If we're cold pickling something, I'm just trying to dissolve the salt and sugar and then cool it down so that I can then cold pickle it. And once the vinegar is cooling, that's when I can begin to prepare whatever I'm going to pickle to go in there. However, if I'm hot pickling, I want to have that already prepared. That makes sense? What was the question?
So when you talk about shorter times versus longer times, cold versus hot, what amount of time are you talking about generally?
Well, this is kind of like the fun of it. It's like continue tasting it, like a hot pickle, usually you need to give it at least overnight if you need to use it right away. But the longer it has in the solution, the more well-rounded, it kind of begins to settle out. Heating something up and pouring over something is like a very volatile reaction. And so it takes time for all that to settle. It's kind of like this idea of like a braise, something like that. If you're braising something, these long, slow cooking methods, you want to, typically it's recommended that you let it cool and then you eat it the next day. And that's the idea. So like all these flavors have a chance to marry together. And because there's all sorts of reactions that are going to happen once these things come in contact with each other. And you want to let that all happen, settle out before you taste it again to really have a strong idea of like where something is at. If I taste something right when it's hot or right when it's first made, it might taste one way. And if I let it cool and go overnight or go for a week or go for a month, then it's going to taste very different. But at a certain point, it will kind of like taste the same. You'll taste it one day and you're like, okay, and then the next day it tastes exactly the same. You're like, all right, that's as far as this one's going. Does that make sense?
So if I heard you correctly, if you're cold pickling something, you're just heating the solution until the sugar melts.
Exactly, until you dissolve it in there.
Could you use like maple syrup?
Absolutely, no, and this is where it's endless.
Right.
And this is what I was also going to say. So a 3-2-1 ratio of vinegar, water, and sugar is like a very acidic and sweet pickle. And I find that I like that a lot. I also really like using the liquids that result from this pickling process. Once again, I typically use white distilled because I want this neutral flavor so that whatever I'm pickling with, especially if I'm pickling with spices or this and that, those flavors are present and it's not competing with, balsamic is probably a vinegar that I wouldn't really use to pickle anything with. It's like a very strong vinegar. It's like use balsamic on its own. But sorry, I didn't get it to stir. And that's the other thing. So when you put your sugar in, you can burn your sugar if you just the sugar is going to settle to the bottom. The sugar and salt are going to settle to the bottom of the pan. And if you don't have to stir it constantly, but if you don't make sure that that liquid kind of gets underneath that sugar, you can end up making like caramel on the bottom or burning the sugar. And not that the caramel will be a bad thing, that would be delicious. And it goes back to your sugar. What do you want to use for your sugar? And this is where it's what do you have on hand? And what do I like? And that, but if you didn't want such an acidic and sugary pickle, if you wanted something more mellow, I know a lot of chefs do a 3-2-1 ratio, but it's 3 parts water, 2 parts vinegar, 1 part sugar. And so you begin to understand that it's like with cooking, there's a lot that goes into it. And so you just need to think about, what am I trying to achieve? What do I like? How does this taste to me? I learned a long time ago that I'm never going to season anything perfectly for everyone. My mother will put salt on food, no matter how well I think I've seasoned it. That's just how it's going to be. There's a certain humility about that. And so, yeah, this is come up now to a boil, and you'll know it's dissolved. You'll know the salt and sugar dissolved when you can't see them in there anymore. The liquid will be clear, and it'll just look like once again, it's like, I was gonna chop all this. I don't know if I'm that fast. But I probably am. Just to give you guys a sense of what it takes. Anybody have any questions at the moment? Are we good? Hi.
So in terms of preserving stuff, I thought that the cold pickling, so like pickles a lot, dill pickles, and I thought that when they're refrigerated with cold pickling, then they can't last as long, although mine seem to last forever.
That is the most important thing for preservation, okay, is that whatever you're preserving remains in the brine, And also, yes, the quality of the vegetable as well. Those brown spots, or if it's already started to rot, the importance of cutting that away is to take away that rot, and to limit that process. Even though, like I said, the vinegar would probably kill whatever it is, it's just like you're already developing off flavors. You kind of want things, this is a great thing. Like, you can take celery that's beginning to wilt in your fridge and pickle it and get use out of it, and not have to throw it away. Okay, but if that celery doesn't, like, sometimes people put things in the crisper and it doesn't stay crisp, right? It begins to wilt a little bit. You could cold pickle that celery and you would have a delicious thing. Okay, but the caveat to that is, because I can see you're looking at me like, wait, you're saying don't use bad stuff, and yet here's this like wilty stuff. Like, there's a difference between something that's kind of like, wilted a little bit because it was exposed in the fridge. It begins to lose a little bit of moisture and it gets like soft, a little bit softer. There's a difference between that and when you've got like a rotten tomato and you put your finger into the soft spot and it's just like mushed out, right? Like, and you can also peel back outer layers of things.
For celery, how long would you leave the stalks?
So this is like the other part. It's like, I brought these pickles here because, you can sit there and kind of like almost whole pickle a carrot. This is a large carrot that we just quartered and did like that. However, if you're at home, you might not have a container this big, let alone like even bigger. So if you've got a small thing, now you need to cut it down, right? And so this is like what I call a roll cut. It's just like an oblique, but we cut things down. I mean, you could dice things. So it depends on the size of the container you're trying to put something into. I think there's a glass jar back here. This is the typical ball jar, celery. I probably just cut this in half so they would all fit in there. And then maybe that's just what I'll do. So you also have to be mindful of what you're pouring your pickling liquid into. Because if you pour pickling liquid or even just put cold pickling liquid into those awesome compostable containers, and I do mean that, they are awesome, they are necessary, they will react though. They are meant to break down. And in the presence of this high acid, those compostable containers are breaking down and they will create off flavors in your pickles. And you'll go to eat your pickles and they will taste terrible. And you'll be like, what happened? Well, it was too acidic. The container you were pickling in, reacted. And so glass is probably the best. I didn't want to go too far down the glass road though, because I'm not getting into canning and sterilization and that whole process. All of these pickles, after they're done, should be kept in the fridge. Technically, they're shelf-stable, but what I'm going to tell you guys, so I don't get sued, is that you should, whenever you pickle these things, after they've cooled down to room temperature, put them in the fridge. And as long as they are covered in the liquid, they will last. I don't want to say indefinitely, because there's a bunch of factors once again that go into how long something's going to last. But I mean, the expiration dates on a lot of things are not there as a guide to how long something will be good. It's more like saving the companies behind in case, something were to go wrong. It's not really, and so I'm sure you guys are aware that many things get thrown away way before they need to be thrown away. And it's all part of, I'm not here to comment on the bureaucracy of America or the FDA or anything like that. It's just this idea that these methods have been around for a really long time. And there's a lot of knowledge behind this. And, sometimes in like the ultra modern approach to science and things, because you're trying to get a one size fits all standard, you kind of have to make a judgment call that doesn't align with the total truth of a subject. I mean, and that's not too different from anything else. So I get it. There's trying to save lives, you know, and that type of thing. But anyway, so the vinegar, hot, in, you would ideally have something that has a spout so it doesn't drip like that, or be better, a better chef than me, you know. But there it is, I mean, it is that simple. And now what I would do is let this cool down, and now there is a little bit that's exposed here, and so you need to find a weight. And a weight can come in many different forms. Some cheesecloth on top can work, because once the cheesecloth gets soaked in liquid, it becomes heavy, it'll hold it down. You can use, this is like parchment paper. What I would probably do is let this cool down first, and then before I put it in the fridge, I put the parchment paper on top, make sure there's pickling liquid on it, and then before I just put the lid on it, and that should be enough weight to keep it down. The weight that you use to hold pickles down in their containers can be anything that ideally isn't going to react, you know. So you don't want to put pickles in metal containers. Metal, a lot of times, is highly reactive with acid, depending on the metal itself. I mean, tin foil, you can put vinegar on certain tin foils and you can watch the vinegar eat right through it. I mean, not only is it eating through it, but all the reactions that are happening there are all creating flavors. Not good flavors necessarily, but a lot of different flavors. So this is, you know, I'm sitting here and kind of to the point of, just as it's hard for the FDA to, you know, make a standard for the expiration date on things, this and that, like, it's the same here, like, this one size fits all. I'm not gonna sit here and tell you that this is the only way to pickle. Like, once again, like, this is just my experience. And as long as, you know, and there are many different guides to this, but it's about tasting things, and it's, like I said, there are certain known common sense rules, like keeping things submerged in brines is always the best way to go. Anything that's exposed to air, that's where rot is gonna happen, and that's where off flavors are gonna happen, and that's where, so as long as you keep things submerged in their brine, and it's sufficiently, you know, acidic enough, which the ratio I gave you, that's the other thing too, the ratio I'm giving you will make sure that anything you pickle is like the liquid, the brine is sufficiently acidic enough to prevent spoilage, if that makes sense. You can go to a more diluted vinegar, but as the pH of the solution shifts to more neutral or more base, you're inviting the conditions for rot or for spoilage, and not for preservation. Does that make sense? Do we have questions?
So that milder solution that you mentioned, flipping out the vinegar to water.
Yeah.
That's one that you should use quicker. Is that what you're?
Yes, I would probably say that. But I mean, you can get into, there's a certain range specifically on the pH scale. I don't want to go like too far into this, but like, you know, pH is a scale of 1 to 14, or 0 to 14. 0 being the most acidic, and 14 being the most alkaline or basic. I can't remember what the precise range is that bacteria can survive in, or most bacteria can survive in. I think it's somewhere between like 3 and 7 is like where you want to avoid. So you want something, and there are test strips that can tell you how acidic something is. There are tools that you can use. So a lot of like these big operations, these big pickling operations, they have all these tools that allow them to deeply understand where their acidity is, to make sure that the preservation they're selling is safe for people to eat, right? And sure.
Can you give any examples of the ways in which you would use something like pickled cauliflower?
I mean, so to me, like charcuterie, right? Charcuterie board. What these acidic foods are awesome for is cutting fat. Acid cuts fat and makes you want to eat more. So when you're eating very, very rich foods, having an acidic counterpoint, cuts the fat, but it also actually makes you want to eat more of it because it clears your palate. And so yeah, a lot of times charcuterie board always has cornichons or mustard, which is made mustard seeds and vinegar essentially boiled together and then blended to create mustard, like high acid. And what I was going to say is, so this kind of goes to the dish that I was going to make. So you can take all these different pickles and you know, you have, and I like to mix them because it's kind of like this garden style, you know, jardinera, you've probably heard the term jardinera. I mean, it's about the garden. And at different times of the year, your jardinera will look different because you're using different things, you know, in the deep winter, you're probably using a lot of root vegetables, you know, in summer, you can have, obviously it's like squashes and cucumbers and, you know, not necessarily melon up here, but peppers and pickling tomatoes is very difficult because they have so much water in them and they break down so easily. But anything that, you know, is hardier, you know, pickles can pickle pretty well. I mean, and cabbages pickle very well. Cauliflower pickles very well. So yeah, I had all these, you know, I think I've got carrots, celery, cucumbers. I think there was some fennel in there, some red onions. I just cut it all down, okay? And what I wanted to do was take some out, and then that cauliflower as well. You got the jardinera style here. And what you could do is, if you wanted to, you could serve this on its own with just a little bit of chili oil, or a little bit of roasted garlic oil, or a little bit of olive oil. And you put that on a bowl, or in a bowl, and like at the beginning of dinner, crackers, pickles, charcuterie, tinned fish, or something like that. The liquid here can be used to dress oysters, like mignonette. That's all mignonette is. You know, mignonette is just, you know, a pickling solution. So that's, you know, you can have your own mignonette, you know, like the flavors of your home are represented like right there on your table. And it's just like, what do I have? Like that's this idea of like how you become to like begin to have an authentic expression of your life. This is from my garden. This is what I pickle. You know, it doesn't taste like, you know, the neighbor stuff. Not that all the neighbors are pickling these days, so not quite that cool. But yeah, so a little bit of chili oil, pickles, and then like highlight fresh pea shoots. You know, which is like, this to me is like this time of year. This time of year, nothing is really growing, right? So you've got this larder and you've got all this stuff that you put away. And then, you know, so there's the winter aspect. We're moving in the spring. Pea shoots are one of the first things that come up that, you know, local farmers can begin to put up. So you just take some fresh pea shoots and throw it right on top. And you can dress that with like a little bit of olive oil. And now you have this like fresh, pickled, it's dynamic. It's got like multiple flavors coming on. It's like complex. Yeah, you eat like, you know, the vinegary carrot and then like the fresh pea shoot. And it's like, right, and like you can do that all year, like whatever you have. Pea shoots are really nice because their flavor stands up to the acid. It stands up to a lot of very strong flavors in like braises or something like that. Whereas like certain herbs like basil or mint, they react differently when they're in the presence of like acid or like heavy salt, or, you know, they can kind of go bad quickly. So pea shoots, especially at this time of year, to kind of add this freshness. And like, you know, the concept of a salad doesn't mean it has to like have greens on it. It's just this idea of like fresh, refreshing, acidic, you know. So to me, yeah, taking these different pickles, a little bit of chili oil, a little bit of, you know, pea shoots on there, and now I've got something that's like, you know, like appetizing. And I'm like, and it can stay on the table because people, if you brought out like a braise, you know, and people were eating, a lot of times people braise with tomatoes or like red wine because like the acid helps break down the food. But it's like, you know, you can sit there and take a bite of this and then take a bite of that. Or why is the dill pickle on the side of the burger? Burger is a very, very rich thing. You take a bite of the pickle, clears out the palate, makes you want to take another bite of your burger, take another bite of the pickle. Like this is, you begin to see how chefs begin to think. It's this idea of like understanding what people are eating and how do I help them enjoy it more instead of just one bite. So yeah, was kind of my thought. It's just like a little dish that you could do, that I would do right now. If you came over to my house, I would probably, you know, you walk in, there'd be a bowl of pickles, there'd be a bowl of crackers, there'd probably be some charcuterie or tinned fish. And yeah, like now, hey, there's a little bit of pea shoots on top or something fresh, because we're in this time of year where it's like coming out of winter, going into spring, but it's not a fresh salad. You know, you could make a salad of pea shoots, but the thing about pea shoots is, yes, they are hardy in a way, but they're also kind of like STEMmy. So just eating a salad of pea shoots is like maybe not the most enjoyable thing. I mean, hey, there's people who do. But that was, you know, one use for me of like last night I made a salad going over to a friend's house, and I just took some of the little leaf lettuces and took a bunch of pea shoots, just rough chopped pea shoots, little leaf lettuce, mixed those together. I didn't dress anything because those are all very delicate. I didn't dress it before I went over to my friend's house, and I brought over a cucumber, and once I got there, I just cut the cucumber, mixed it in with the salad, and then I dressed it, you know, because the dressing is going to break that down very quickly if you give it too much time. So dressing at the last moment, seasoning at the last moment with delicate things, that's kind of how that goes. One other thing that I wanted to highlight with you people too, that people don't really know that they can do, which is awesome, and has a lot of different uses and can be used to perk up the salad. I mean, that's the other thing you do with these pickles. Like you can take that cauliflower and throw it into, you know, cooked eggplant dish or something like that. And it's like this idea of seasoning, you know, something, or take squash, right? If you took fresh squash this summer, which everybody's like, what do you do with fresh squash? You can eat it raw, but then you take some of this cauliflower, chop it up, maybe small, use a little bit of that curry liquid and a little bit of olive oil and dress your squash with it. And now you have kind of like a squash salad. And you, once again, it's like dynamics. And the liquid from the pickles is dressing the squash, and they're playing with each other. Dried fruit, you know, these are golden raisins, and these were dried cherries. And I just took the same ratio that I just told you guys, 3, 2, 1, poured that over the dried fruit in a container, rehydrate the fruit in that, and now I have pickled raisins, awesome in like curry chicken salad. Curry chicken salad, use your cauliflower, you know what I'm saying? Like, begin to like look at recipes and where you see, you know, a pickle. Oh, I don't have that pickle, but I've got this pickle, so maybe I could use that. Like curry chicken salad with pickled red onions, curry chicken salad with pickles. I mean, like, you know, traditional cucumber pickles, curry chicken, you know, not have to be curry chicken salad. It's not the only chicken salad. But, you know, I mean, you could pickle dried cranberries, you know, and use them in wheat salad, or it's just, you have all these ways of like introducing flavor and, you know, making things more interesting with very little effort. That's the other thing too. If you have these things in your fridge, if you have these things readily available, then you go to the farmer's market and what's fresh? Cool. And then I come home and I've got this sauce or this liquid or this vinegar, or, you know, and now it doesn't really matter what the farmer has. I come home and I look at my pantry and I'm like, all right, what works with this? You know, like, and that's like kind of how I run my kitchens. It's this idea of like, we're always putting up preserves. So here, you know, we're trying not to waste things. We're always putting up preserves, pickles, salting, this and that. And the idea is that when I then go to the farm and they're like, hey, we've got all this, usually squash or pepper or something, like, or eggplant. I bring it back. I'm not even 100% sure what I'm going to do with it. And the cooks and I, we go on a walk and it's like, all right, what do we have? What needs to get used? And in that way, like, it's always changing and it's always fresh, and you're keeping your guests interested. And it's not that there's anything wrong. Sometimes you go to a restaurant because you want everything to stay the same. And sometimes you won't go to a restaurant because everything stays the same. So, you know, finding that balance is each restaurant's challenge. But yeah, like for me, this was the concept. You know, you build a larder, you build a pantry of preserves and spices and like all the stuff, and then when you get the awesome piece of fish, or you get the awesome meat, or you get the awesome vegetable, you can do something with it that is you. That's still an expression of what your work, your effort. Like, so yeah, that's the thought on that. Mike.
Great idea. I would never think to pickle the fruit. What would you do with the dried cherries, for example?
Same thing. I mean, drain them. And this is like the awesome thing too, especially with the pickled fruit liquids, the liquid that's left here, shrub sodas. I don't know if you're familiar, like, so you take this sweet sour, sometimes salty, depending on how, you use that liquid and you take some soda, like club soda or whatever, or tonic water, seltzer water, plain seltzer water, mix them together, and it's up to you to taste. I'm not gonna give you a ratio that works every time type of thing. I mean, you'd start with 1 to 1 and then, taste from there. And it's like, but exactly. And then, so I haven't really gone into fermentation, and this would be the thing. So I focus right here on vinegar pickles. Fermentation, technically is a pickle preservation method. The difference is it's usually just done with salt. All right, salt solution, and what you're doing is a 3% brine is a really good basic ratio for fermentation, and what that means is water, and then 3% of the weight of that water in salt. Mix those together to dissolve the salt, and now you have a brine. Okay, and what you do is, you take cucumbers, or you take almost anything, and you put it into that brine, and you make sure that it's submerged, and the natural lactobacillus bacteria that are present everywhere are going to, you create an environment in that salt solution that favors them and excludes a lot of other harmful microbes. All right, and an analogy that I like to use, and this is not mine, just to be clear, it's kind of like the bouncer at a club. He's only letting the people in that he wants in. He's kind of like keeping everything out. The salt solution acts like that bacteria. It keeps out a lot of the things that you don't want in there. And then what ends up happening is the lactobacillus feeds off the natural sugars present in the food, and the byproduct of that is lactic acid. That lactic acid then pickles the food. And so and everybody has an example of ferments. I mean, now we're like going down a whole new road. And fermentation is this, it's a little wild because it's not just lactobacillus that's in there, and there's also 260 kinds of lactobacillus, and they all have their own flavor. And when they're in the presence of squash, it's different than when they're in the presence of tomatoes, and different kind of tomato, and where was tomato grown, and that tomato tastes like infinite. It's infinite, and so, but the general idea is I'm preserving I'm putting something in a salt solution to create an environment that then preserves the food and we can still eat it. A lot of times it's very salty, so we have to find different ways of cutting that saltiness. But if the solution is more mild, such as like a kombucha, we can just drink it almost straight up. And then you have to be careful though, if you begin to ferment things if there's too much sugar present, you can begin to, or depending on certain bacteria that are present, you can create alcohol. And this is where, a wine is fermentation, cider is fermentation, beer is fermentation. Fermentation is like, humans love fermentation. I mean, really love. And that's the idea too, is like you begin to see these. So in Eastern Europe or in Europe, sauerkraut, Germany, or beet kraut, same kind of idea, just cabbage or beets or rutabagas, turnips, these things, radishes, fermented in a salt solution in a brine, and then preserved for later, and then brought out. And the Koreans do the same thing, except they introduced the chili paste because they had all these, chilies. So they dried those, and then they, rehydrate them to create chili paste, and that becomes your kimchi. Sauerkraut, kimchi, same thing, right? Or same idea behind it. And that's kind of like what I really love about food. Once, going back to the beginning of this, is you begin to see these like cross-cultural connections. And it's like, everybody's got a pickle. That was one of my favorite chefs walked in, and was just kind of like, every culture has a pickle, and not just one, like hundreds. And it's just kind of like, the more you understand them and begin to understand the processes that are behind them, the more tools that are at your arsenal to develop flavor and to serve exciting food and exciting dishes and to put out something that you're proud of. So I started to go into kimchi, and I'm going to keep going into kimchi. I'm just going to clean up for a second. Give myself a little bit of space.
Garrett, will you talk about your childhood a little bit?
My childhood.
Opening your book.
I mean,
I am, no, I am, so, both my parents are colonels in the Marine Corps. I am one of 7 children, well, on my dad's side. And I grew up moving around a lot. I lived in Okinawa, Japan for 4 years, when I was 8 to 12 years old. I lived in Germany for 2 years in high school. I lived up and down the East Coast. And so I was exposed to a lot of things in a lot of different cultures, and just kind of, I would say, I didn't like a lot of Japanese food when I was in Japan, because it's very different flavor profile from American food. However, when you travel like that, or when you're forced to travel like that, you are exposed to the idea that there are different ways of doing things, that there's not just like one way. And playing kids in soccer from Japan, or in Germany, or wrestling guys from Turkey, or like this and that, it was like there are different ways of trying to achieve the same results, and different concepts of team, and different, like when you're driving in Japan early in the morning, I mean, there are factories of workers that are all outside doing calisthenics, and but you can also see like the correlation for me living on a military base, where there's groups of people running in formation down, and you're like, oh hey, everybody does this, like, or everybody has their version of this, like that type of thing. So the idea that I would be open to not just doing French food, and for me as a chef, as a person, like I was probably never going to get pinned down into one style of cuisine. Like I know that there's too much out there. The fun part for me is beginning like to understand the backbones of all these cuisines, and that they all do relate. And so one that I usually use as an example is like China and Italy both have noodles. I mean, noodles came from China to Italy, but you have your pasta and you have noodles. Southern China and Southern Italy also use very spicy cuisines. And so it's just this idea that like, yeah, it's not weird for me to take like a spicy Chinese condiment, and I try to stay away from the term fusion, because that can go really bad really quickly, like sushi burritos. I'm sorry, it's not right behind it. But it's just this idea that like you can begin to see the correlations between things, and it opens you up to like, I don't have this in my pantry, but I do have this, and I know that they both kind of do the same thing, so I could use this in place of that and still create something delicious. And yeah, as a byproduct, because everybody wants to be authentic now, create my own thing. This is my own understanding of how something should work. Also, just as another note, celery leaf, fantastic garnish as well. Don't throw those away. My wife the other day was like throwing one of these out, and I was like, dude, no, this is the best part. The best part of your garnish. So throwing those in there in your salad, and then chopping, it's like, this is a little pet peeve of mine. Don't throw away your celery. All right, so. Please, sir.
The dried fruit, do
Yeah.
you reduce the amount of sugar in your formula because there's a lot of sugar in there, or
No,
just do it straight up?
I don't. Typically by the time it rehydrates, it is something, once again, like that's a great consideration. Like it comes down to do a batch and see what you like.
And is that a hot?
That is a hot pickle.
That is a
However, with dried fruit, you can cold pickle. It will just take longer for the fruit to reabsorb it. And you do need to be careful too with the hot pickle and certain dried fruits, because depending on the amount and this and that, like the fruit will go soft, and it'll be more appropriate to use it for like a jam or like a condiment or something like that, as opposed to like in and of itself. Raisins are really good because they're really hearty. Apricots are really good because they're like really hearty. Yeah, prunes and like dried plum, I'd probably cold pickle as opposed to hot pickle, because they can go mushy really quick.
And the cherries, you
Cherry hot pickle, but it also comes down to like how thoroughly were they dried. Sometimes there's different degrees of dryness. I'm sure you've noticed like an apricot dried here is different from an apricot dried here by this company or by this company. So it's just about paying attention, and then like when you do something, whether it goes right or wrong, it doesn't have to necessarily go wrong. It doesn't have to be a mistake if you're paying attention would say, don't throw them out, because you can just blend them and with like a little bit of oil, make like fruit butter. That's probably fantastic, and you spread that on top of toast. Cool. So it's just, once again, like when you know all the tools at your disposal, it's like, all right, don't freak out. How can I use this? And you might not know in the moment, but I'm hesitant to tell you to throw something away, especially if you work really hard on it, before you're thoroughly convinced that, like, I don't know how to make this work in the kitchen. But like,
That's what dogs are for.
yeah, exactly.
You ever ferment with honey?
Yes, you can ferment with honey, and once again, like, it's, you're introducing sugar. So usually when I ferment, I don't introduce sugar, because it can get wild. And so it depends on what you're fermenting. If there's a lot of sugar already present in it, I probably wouldn't bring anything in there. But you can put honey in, yeah, with cabbage or turnips or something like that. It's gonna be awesome. And yeah, a lot of times, I mean, ferments are funky too. There's like, not all the time, but like, I mean, dill pickles don't necessarily have a terrible aroma, but fermented cabbage, fermented turnips, fermented radishes, like, it smells like a fart when you open that container up, you know. But there's a savoriness there once you get past that is fairly enjoyable. And it's also about understanding how to use that. Like, and it's not for everyone. That's the other thing too. It's also going back to my experience growing up, different cultures, this and that, like, you realize that, yeah, people's palates are based on what they grew up eating and what they're comfortable with. And so, yeah, you go to Thailand and they've got fermented river crab in their salad. I can only get down with like so much funk. I mean, I really love it, but like there are limits sometimes where I'm like, yeah, that's just too much for me. Like, I don't know how, like, it's cool that you do, but like that's not me, you know. When you start getting into like fermenting shellfish and fermenting like proteins, you're getting like some real funk. And I love fish sauce, and like, I mean, I make my own, and that's a fermentation. That's one thing. Like, but you also, when you begin fermenting proteins, it's a different game, and it's not something that I would really feel comfortable like teaching in a class like that, because I don't have all the particulars, you know. So that's something you can read up on and do yourself. But yeah, we'll leave that one for a different class.
And then burying it in the ground.
And yeah, you can bury it in the ground. Yeah, so Icelandic shark, you know, fermented shark, like that's, I haven't heard good things about that. Okay, so I'm gonna go into, kimchi, which technically is a ferment. It's a Korean, most people know it through Korean means, and it's typically done with Napa cabbage. But what you will begin to understand is that you can kimchi anything. Like, it's just a process, and it's just a flavor combination. And just as there's many different kinds of peppers, you know, or many different, there's kimchi can taste very, very different. There's not one taste of kimchi. And so and part of the reason I'm saying that is because I came to kimchi at Sunbird. I don't do it the way that like a lot of people maybe traditionally have done it. Mine is more, it's based on what a restaurant, you know, what the restaurant I was working at needed. So take a head and nap cabbage, lit it, and so clean the cabbage of any like funky outer leaves, you know, and get down to where you're consistently seeing like nice heads, or nice leaves with lettuce, or nice leaves with cabbage, nice leaves with green. And at this point, it's up to you how big you wanna make it. A lot of times, in my understanding is in Korea at this point, you could kimchi this whole thing together. And what they do at that point is, so kimchi is cabbage. This is a salt sugar solution. Some people just use salt. Some people, you know, and the ratio of sugar to salt is, you know, up to the cook in a lot of ways. And then what I have here is essentially a chili paste. And what is in this chili paste is Korean chili, not gochujang, just Korean chili, like soy sauce, garlic, ginger. So this is a vegan. And the reason we developed vegan kimchi at Sunbird was because we wanted an option for vegans. A lot of times kimchi will have oysters, or will have dried shellfish, or will be made with fish sauce. Like, there's a bunch of different ways to introduce other flavors into kimchi. But this right here is just garlic, ginger, chili paste, soy sauce. And what they will typically do is then layer this in between the leaves and then pack that into a container or a ceramic crock, something like that. And then they let nature run its course. And what I ended up doing was, quartering kimchi, or quartering cabbage, cut out the heart or the core, and then just kind of like cutting it into rough pieces. They can be a little bit bigger than you would think. Normally, my suggestion for when you're cutting things, like size-wise, is think about bite sizes. Think about bite sizes. So like cutting things to like that size, unless you know that you're going to cut it down again at some other point. However, when we ferment pickle things, they release liquid and they'll shrink up a little bit on their own. So sometimes if you want, you can cut it a little bit bigger than bite size.
When you make the chili paste, did you do that in like a vitamin?
I did, yeah. And I mean, you can use the RoboCoop, and that's the thing too. I mean, you can use whole dry chilies, you can use chili flakes, you can use chili powder. That's like, yes, there's a certain traditional dry chili that is used in Korea, but that doesn't have to be the only thing. I mean, you can use many of the dry chilies from Mexico, and you will get a unique chili paste that you can use to do the same process, and you will create a delicious preserve that can be used in a bunch of different ways. So if I try to put all this in here, it's probably not going to fit. All right, but cut it, get it in the bowl, and now what we would do is we have pretty much a 50-50 salt and sugar ratio, all right, to make the cure.
And which salt are you using?
Kosher salt, yeah, kosher salt, but you don't have to use kosher salt, at least for this. It's not, kosher salt for when I'm seasoning food, like at a restaurant or at home, like it has a certain feel, and it's a very specific kind of kosher salt is what I'm used to, because in some ways I'm pickled. I can't like go back, like when I grab kosher, like Morton's kosher salt, it feels wrong. This feels weird. I'm so used to using the Diamond brand, and I've got some down low, but like Diamond brand kosher salt, that's just the result of me using it over and over and over again. It doesn't make it right, it just makes it, what I'm used to. But you could use sea salt for this. You could use big sea salt, like that would be cool too. Because what's going to happen is all you're doing here is just salt and sugar. And however, I do, because this is a vegan kimchi, this is what's that? Not all natural cane sugar, but it's not granulated sugar. It's not white granulated sugar, because somebody, when I was first making kimchi and selling it and calling it vegan, I had somebody come up to me and ask me if it was granulated sugar, white granulated sugar. And I said it was. And they said, well, then it's not vegan. And I said, how's that? And I said, typically they use bone char to purify the sugar white. Animal bones, like, I don't know the exact process. And I was like, oh, cool. So from then on, I had to source a different kind of sugar that's a little less, quote unquote, refined, and actually probably has a little bit more flavor to it. But it has difference between, once again, sugar, white sugar, granulated sugar reacts in a very certain way when it gets heated and has very specific effects. Especially this becomes important when you're baking things, or when you're working with caramel, or when you're working with like cooked sugars that you need to do certain things. When you have, like brown sugars, the reason that's brown, the color difference is quote unquote impurities that react differently and don't allow the sugars to crystallize in the same ways, right? So that's the real difference why a lot of times, there's all these different sugars, and it's because they all have very different effects, or they have very different properties. And those properties can really reveal themselves depending on what you're doing. So we sprinkled a little bit of cure in here. You can be pretty rough. All right, typically I would use my hands, but I don't have any gloves right now, and I don't want you guys to think I'm a total like, hack here, and I'm just like putting a big old bear claw in there. But you're just gonna keep
So it's well coated.
Exactly, and actually it should taste, it's kind of delicious as it is, like, you know, like you want to be able to taste the salt and sugar over everything. It needs to be very, very present. You can get into like specific amounts of salt and sugar to the vegetable. Like I have a ratio, but this was for like a very big batch, and it was 4.5 kilograms of clean chopped cabbage to 750 grams of salt and 750 grams of sugar. And what you end up doing is, so you mix it all very well, and then we let it go overnight through the magic of television. We have this salted cabbage, which is now like reduced in size and is like completely like wilted out, okay? And at this point, you also have a brine. This is all the water that was in the cabbage. I didn't add any water to it, so I know you guys actually get how much. So this was the same size head of cabbage, right? That got wilted down to this. You know, I couldn't even fit the whole cabbage into one bowl, and now I could fit the whole thing into a quarter of that bowl, and then it's all liquid.
That's impressive.
All right, so like that's how much water is in cabbage, and that water, depending on who you are, is tasty. I mean, I'm not gonna go. I've tried to find uses for this. It's pretty funky. You could brine meat in it. You could definitely like or like marinate meat in it and then like cook with it. But you gotta kind of understand that that's what's funky. Sometimes you just gotta throw it out. I'm not just gonna sit this for y'all. So now I've got this salted cabbage ready to go, and I've got this chili paste, and then we're just mixing the chili paste in with the cabbage to just like thoroughly coated. Once again, it's really good to use your hands to really make sure that everything gets like well coated. And I mean, it smells pretty awesome. And I'm not gonna lie, there have been times that like essentially this is just like the dressed salad. I've like when I've been making a batch of kimchi, I just take a little bit, put it into a bowl, and put a fried egg on it. It's delicious. Like it's a little sweet, it's a little salty, but I mean that's also kind of like a cook's treat type of thing. Some people might not think it's a treat. And then once you've got it well dressed, you need to put it into a container once again that's like not going to react. So neutral container. I wouldn't put kimchi to ferment in a metal container. It's got a lot of, you know, kimchi once again the same process. The lactobacillus is going to ferment it, brine it essentially, pickle it, and that acid will react with certain metals. And the other thing too is like you're putting it into these containers for a long time. So you're giving it a long time to potentially react with these other containers. So, you know, some people aren't fans of plastic, and I totally get that as well. You know, glass is always probably best. Sometimes it's hard to find those glass containers. And they're also, from a restaurant perspective, they're very expensive and they're very breakable. You don't really want a lot of glass in your kitchens in a restaurant because if that glass breaks, you've got a real problem on your hands, depending on where the glass went. And yeah, so now, usually this container probably, you want a container that is going to, you know, the cabbage is just barely gonna fit in. This isn't like the perfect example of this, but you don't want a lot of extra room around it. Ideally also, if you have a container, so ceramics work great because they don't let any light in. So you don't want fermentation and light, don't go well together. Dark fermentation, you know, and that's probably why it kind of has that like scary aura about it as well. Like in the dark, underneath grandma's sink, and you got all this stuff going on down there. It's weird, it looks weird. You know, have you ever seen Vinegar Mothers? Like they're just, yeah, you know, like stuff nightmares made of. So, you know, a little parchment paper here. You could totally use plastic wrap. You could use cheesecloth as well. That would be fine. Cheesecloth is good safe, and you're just kind of like packing it down, and then you're gonna put a lid on it, and you're gonna put it. And all fermentation best happens between 60 and 68 degrees Fahrenheit. And this becomes tricky in the summer because things get hot. And I have learned, everything I've learned through trial and error, okay? And yeah, the first summer I was at Sunbird and I was making my own kimchi and making my own ferments and stuff, had in this back room, I didn't realize how hot it was getting back there. But the higher the temperature, the faster the process happens. And also, the faster other processes happen. And you can open things after a week on, a hot week in the summer. And this has gone way farther than you wanted it to go, or your ferments have gone way farther than you wanted them to go. And a lot of times, there's a bunch of other stuff on top. And kind of like the same process applies with kimchi as well. It's like, yeah, trying to keep it, you don't want a lot of room on the top, you don't want to leave a lot of air or like access for other things to grow. And a lot of the stuff that grows on top isn't necessarily bad. And usually you can just scrape it off. You don't have to, if there's a little bit of like mold on top of your kimchi, you don't have to throw the whole batch out. What you need to do is very carefully, usually with a gloved hand, go in and just kind of like scrape off the bad stuff, maybe take a little bit of the good stuff that's underneath it just for safety's sake, throw that out, and the rest of it's fine. Like these things are, these preservation methods have lasted so long because they last so long, like it has allowed food to last. And so, yeah, and then I would take this, find a spot, 60 to 70 degrees, 60 to 68 degrees or 70 degrees, it's room temperature in most people's house. But once again, put it somewhere that there's no light, it's not near the window, that type of thing. You can put it in your handy cooler down here, just like leave it down there. And once it's in that environment, it'll take, so my recipe for this was like 2 weeks, and you can taste it every day if you want, but you're really not going to notice much of a difference until at least a week, and then you start going in. It'll go through a period of like effervescence, where you really know that it's fermenting, and then that'll kind of like die out, and it'll still keep going. So this is a kimchi right here. So once again, actually I can pull that back out because, so this is the finished product. And the difference between, where this is and where this is like pretty stark, right? This kimchi is 2 years old, okay? And it's delicious, and it is. So the other thing that happens is that this will continue to release, even though I had all that liquid there, this will continue to release more liquid as the cabbage continues to break down. And so keeping it, once again, that brine is a good thing. The other thing is if you have a previous batch of kimchi, so going into fermentation again, there's a concept called backslop. Terrible name. I don't know why they call it this. Right? It sounds terrible. It's called backslop. So you take the liquid from a previous ferment and use that because all the cultures, all the bacteria that you want are present in this. And you use that to start your next batch. And it's the same as if this was, a 3% brine solution of carrot liquid. I had fermented carrot liquid for my last batch. I would use that to start the next batch. Okay, and then you just kind of keep going. And that's the whole idea too of like the vinegar mother. You create these mothers and then these grandmothers. Like, so I grew up in Virginia on and off as well. There's military base or Marine Corps base Quantico there. Then there's Pentagon. So, and I went to school in Southwest Virginia, I went to Radford University where I got my anthropology degree. I was introduced to the Appalachian culture and the idea that, poor people in the mountains don't have a lot of preservation in the American South. The American South is probably the area of America that is most well known for these techniques, both through, the African American slave experience and, just poor white people down there as well. It's just kind of like Southerners know a lot about fermentation. Poor people know a lot about fermentation and preserving foods because they have to, not because it's cool, not because it, necessarily tastes good, but it's like, it's a way of life. And that is, once again, a connection, poor people around the world. In Italy, cucina, I'm going to butcher this, cucina de povera, cuisine of the poor. In China, it's a very frugal, there's not a lot of meat. This idea of like eating meat is, a new a new human development. Eating meat at the scale that we eat today, it's very American development and, spreading out. But meat used to be hard to come by. So you have all these things which help you like stretch out a meal and season the meat, to make it last longer or whatever. So what I want to do right now with this is take kimchi and I'm going to steam some clams with it. Give one. Here's some pickling liquid for anybody who wants to take some. And yeah, this is very simple. This is once again. So all I'm doing is I got some little neck clams from Wellfleet Shellfish Company. And heating up my pan. You don't need any oil. And are you guys familiar with steaming shellfish? Everybody familiar with the process of steaming shellfish?
Is everybody okay with?
Oh yeah, actually, that's a very good question because any shellfish allergies around here. And the reason I ask is because when shellfish gets steamed, the protein that people are allergic to can be present in the air, and you can still have an allergic reaction to that. That makes sense?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So we're good. Everyone cool? I'm not gonna sit there and turn the fan on, then you're not gonna hear me. Maybe you don't want to hear. So pan, get your pan hot. There's nothing in it. There's no oil or anything. These clams have been pre-washed. Ideally they've been purged very, very heavily. You're probably still gonna get temperature, a touch of grit in clams because as the clams knock against each other, they can knock a little bit of shell fragment off. So if you're thinking that you're gonna get steamed shellfish that doesn't have anything, you do your best. So, let it get hot. All right, and then heat. All right, so you've got clams, they're in there, pan's getting very hot. We want it to get very hot so that we produce a lot of steam. I'm purposely using just water because the kimchi itself is still very salty and it's still very flavored and has a lot of acidity. So it's that idea of why do people use white wine? Acid, but kimchi is going to have plenty of that. Probably going to let it get hotter. It'll be all right. Water in, steam, kimchi. I wish I could give you a ratio. It's probably about 2 cups kimchi to 24 little necks. It's probably what this is going to equal out to. Just gonna let that go until all the clams open. Okay. And then from there, show you what we're gonna do with that. This is another thing. You can also take that kimchi juice and you can use that in there. But just remember, if it's salty, it's gonna reduce down and become saltier, and you're using it with clams. So I have a way that we're gonna mitigate that, and it's with our old friend butter. So, but you could use something else in place of butter if you were, trying to think. There are actually a lot of really good plant butters out there nowadays, so that can go just as well. If you're not so worried about it being quote unquote emulsified, you could just use olive oil, you could just do something, but that fat completely is going to help dilute the salinity of the dish. So, but also understand that it's kimchi and clams, it's gonna be a salty dish. Sometimes people have the wrong expectation. We set ourselves up for disappointment. So
And the saltiness when you have it in front of the meal, like actually,
Yeah,
so. It'd be nice thing to like.
exactly. I mean, that's, yeah, steamed shellfish is always a great way to start a meal night.
Right, so you didn't wash the cabbage, you just took the leaves off from the outside.
I had already washed it
Oh.
before, exactly, but, and that's the other thing too. Pay attention when you're cleaning it, because especially with like cabbages, things like that, I mean, lettuce in general, head lettuce. You'll go to cut into it, no matter how, you wash it very, very well, but depending on where it was grown, it can still be very sandy, so you might have to wash again. So like, I usually serve like a little gem salad, little gem lettuce salad, at the restaurants, so like, kind of the best lettuce. It's hearty, you can really stand up to like a thick, creamy, acidic vinaigrette. But when the cooks go to clean it, and I'm very particular about this because nothing ruins a meal faster than a grain of sand in your salad or something like that. We quarter it, so we pull off all the bad leaves, we give them an initial rinse, and then we go back through, we quarter them all, and then they go back in again and really, really get agitated because now the water has a lot more access to the deep layers of the root because I like serving the root on a lot of lettuces. There's like a pleasant bitterness there. Bitter is not a bad flavor, it's an adult flavor. Americans really don't like bitter. We like a lot of sweet things. We don't really understand how to use bitter, but we're coming around the idea of like the aperitif, the digestif, like that bitterness also stimulates our appetites, having it at the beginning. But bitter is, yeah, to me, I'm like, that's an adult flavor. We're dealing with adult flavors. And, yeah, that's right. I experiment a lot. I love it. Because it's baby. So, eat a lot of baby food, right?
You're saying that this after 2 weeks will look with moisture, the moisture will be
Yep.
there.
Yes, moisture will be there. It will look very different. It will look not exactly like this, but it'll look much closer to this. And that's, at that point, like begin tasting it. What you shouldn't taste anymore is like right now with where that is, there's a lot of raw salt and sugar grains on there. So it'll be crunchy, all right? It shouldn't be crunchy anymore. Salt and sugar will completely dissolve themselves. You won't notice that at all.
For the one that's 2 years old, is there a point where you like transfer it to the fridge, or is it always in?
Oh, no. So that's the other thing. I do put it in the fridge.
Okay.
Okay, yeah, no, it hasn't been a room temp for 2 years. That's actually a very, very good
What's
question.
the point where
At
you
a
change
certain
it?
point, so once it gets to that place that like I'm happy with it,
Yeah.
like it's like flavor wise, then I can put it in the fridge and it'll go forever. And once again, when you have a huge or not a huge walk-in, but when you have a walk-in refrigerator, you have a lot of space. I mean, preserving things and having a lot of preserves and kind of like building a pantry like this is a commitment. It's a commitment. It's not just like the sealed jar that somebody else did for you. It's like, yeah, it's gonna take up space in your fridge and they can get messy and like you gotta pay attention to them a little bit because it's not, there aren't a bunch of preservative chemicals in there. It's a much more organic and natural process. So you just have to pay attention. It's like, that's how it was always explained to me though, like good cooking, it's like anything else, like it's about paying attention. Like paying attention to what you're buying, paying attention to all the factors that I began talking about today.
How do you know when it's time to throw away a jar of pickles? I pickled things like years ago that are still at the back of my fridge. I'm
Yeah.
afraid to eat them, but I can't bear to throw them.
So, I mean, I usually follow Sandor Katz. So Sandor Katz is kind of like the godfather of fermentation, at least in this country. He wrote a book called The Art of Fermentation. And in that book, he says, nobody ever died if you ate the ferment. There's a caveat with that. Like, if you ate the stuff that wasn't in the brine, you're potentially exposing yourself to way different pathogens and microbes and stuff. Stuff that's in the brine, in the vinegar, it might not taste good anymore, but I don't think you're going to be hurt eating it. Okay. However, and this is like, serve safe and all that type of stuff, compromised immune systems, elderly people, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's up to you to know, like, same thing with eating raw oysters, raw fish, like, you're always, like, you need to know, if you're not comfortable taking that risk, then throw it out, like, but for the most part, for me, it's like, yeah, put it in your mouth and taste it. Like, how do you know when feed's done? Like, boiling peas, like, how do you know if feed's done? Put it in your mouth and taste it.
How do
to keep track of everything that's in the refrigerator.
How do you keep track of everything
You
in the
must
refrigerator?
have so much in there. I can't keep track of what's in my refrigerator. What's the
My
best
fridge
way
now,
to
so-
do that?
My wife helps me keep track of stuff at home, alright? She's like, she will let me know if there's too much stuff in the fridge, and either I find a way to use it, or it's gonna get tossed. However, you know, it is, this is what I also meant to, about it being a commitment, though. At the restaurant, there are certain days where like I've got this a wall of vinegar and pickles and this, and like, I get drawn into the organization of it, and yes, checking it, tasting it, like, the lids will get like kind of funky, so I'll take the lids off and sterilize them, like, you know, put them through the dish again, and like, you know, you're, yeah, it's a labor of love, you're paying attention to these things, so if you just put it in the bag and forget about it, like, you're probably gonna have a negative experience with it, like, it requires a commitment to doing it, which is why a lot of people don't necessarily do it. It's not convenient. I mean, you can make it convenient. It's convenient to have these like liquids and oils and stuff in your fridge when you just like on the fly want to make a meal. But like, it's sacrifice. It's what do you want to prioritize?
Hi, over the years I've eaten a lot at Sunbird.
Yeah.
And so whether they were pickled or not, I'm not sure, but are you responsible for the not weed sprouts or whatever?
So yeah, way back in the day, we did that, and that was awesome. That's when we had Jamie's sister Samantha, who was a forager extraordinaire. But like, she was actually responsible for me.
But at what point in the spring, up to what point can you cut the knotweed for eating? Because eventually it's.
Well, that's the thing. It's almost
Knotweed.
like that is another thing.
Mhm.
Like,
Japanese
it
knotweed,
gets
like,
so
grows
vibrant
crazy
that,
all over.
like, yeah, you know. Sarah, you might have an idea on that.
Yeah, again, it's about paying attention to what happens, but typically when the shoots are,
Just that, yeah, that's what I think, like asparagus almost.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And you did pickle those? That's what I can't remember.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you. You got the spin on, it's right there. At this point, most of the plants have opened. It's gonna sound terrible, it's gonna be a big hack. Typically when I steam shellfish, you're right over it, and I'm pulling the shellfish out as soon as it opens, so that it doesn't overcook. And then what you do is, once everything is steamed itself open, put them all back in the pot, kind of like reheat it, and finish the sauce. That isn't the way that everybody does it. A lot of people just leave the shellfish that have opened in there while they're waiting for the rest of them to open. You can do that too, just understand that things are continuing to cook. So it's, yeah, do you have time to sit here and pull them out one by one? You know, there's nothing wrong with, you know, doing it and just waiting for them all to open. Right? So we need to let the stitch like it will do it. So one other thing that I was going to talk about was that, you know, the overlook method of preservation that we all have available as well is the freezer. We can talk about it. And going back to our pea shoots, I took pea shoots, I put them in a blender, a little bit of water, enough water to make them spin, the blender to work. Made kind of, yeah, like puree, a loose puree. I added some vinegar. I added a little bit of maple syrup, and so it tasted good, but still tasted like pea shoots. I didn't want it to be too sweet. Didn't want it to be too vinegary, because if it's too vinegary, vinegar will brown your pea shoots. But of course, so what I have here is, you can kind of say is like a pea shoot, frozen pea shoot puree, or what they call it, granite. There's two different ways to say it. I'm never sure. I'm always self-conscious. I'm saying the wrong one, so I say both. It's like one red. Granite or granita. Okay. What that is just a frozen condiment, essentially. And what's really nice on oysters. So there's a restaurant called Eventide. I don't know if you're familiar with it. They started in Portland. It's an oyster bar. They got one in the Fenway in Boston. They have with their oysters, you can choose many different ices. And essentially all that they're doing is taking their kimchi, their preserves. They have kimchi ice, and they'll have all sorts of seasonal ices. They're just freezing these things into this quote unquote granite, and, yeah, and then they're topping it on their oysters. And it's just another way to, you know, kind of,
Will they actually puree something like kimchi and freeze it? Or do
yeah,
they-
there's different ways of doing it. It's kind of like how refined you want it to be. Like,
Yeah.
you could just puree it and then strain it and use the juice to freeze it and make it ice, and then it's like very, or you can make it like a little chunkier, like kind of what I did here. I didn't pass this through a chinois or, you know, through a strainer. I just,
So what else did you add besides the pureed pea shoots?
yeah, so besides the peach juice, a little bit of maple syrup and a little bit of rice wine vinegar. I'm really taking my time here. I'm only better at this, so we'll allow practice. Got your oyster. Be nice if I, you know, got a plate for myself, but I didn't. It's gonna be a lot of stuff. And pork. Then you just kind of grate it up. Use a spoon. Top it off. I probably done more. You can mount as much as you want, but I mean, oyster's nice. You know, so, but it's like, yeah, this idea, once again, so here's this local food. Local food, local issues this time of year. You know, here's how we make it, you know, a seasonal accompaniment for something that's a year-round food. I mean, oysters, you know, at their best in the winter, you know, when the water's cold and they build up their fat again, and, you know, they're post-spawn and the whole thing, like, so, you know, and this, you could make these, you know, throughout the season, you could make a couple granite cakes. You put them in the right type of container, they don't have to take up too much room in your freezer. And then, you know, throughout the year, you can be like, hey, you can make a tomato granite cake. You can make, you know, a plum or a strawberry or like whatever. And like, yeah, fish and fruit, just so you know, shellfish and fruit, awesome combination. Like, a little unexpected.
And you're always using the fruit raw.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, not cooked. But I mean, that's the thing too. It's like you could take, well, you can't take a jam because there's so much sugar present, it won't freeze properly. So if there's something has too much acid in it, or if it has too much sugar in it, then you begin to inhibit something's ability to freeze properly, or too much salt in it. It's not going to freeze properly. It's just like why we use salt. So yeah.
That's awesome. I like that kind of, I know it's such a silly detail, but that kind of container too, that stacks.
Well, this is, you know, to your point, like how do you do it like sane? How do you keep your fridge like sane? It's like having the right containers in there so that it's easy to move things around, and like if you make things a chore, you're not gonna want to do it. So it's like finding the things that allow life to be a little easier, you know, for things that you want to do can go a long way towards something's enjoyment. It's like the right tool for the right job. So here, check on our shellfish. Well, no, I'm not always as clumsy in the kitchen, so if you're like thinking about coming to a restaurant, you're like, well, I got to struggling back there. So,
He doesn't always look like back there.
So do you do, just back to that question about like labeling, do you do like masking tape with a Sharpie?
I do. I mean, not masking tape, painter's tape.
Painter's tape?
Painter's tape is a great, relatively cheap way to keep things organized in your fridge. I usually have a roll of tape, blue or green, a Sharpie, a pair of scissors, and the scissors are really, because I'm pretty particular about how I like things to look at least in my restaurant fridge. When you have 3 kids under 5 or under 6, you don't really have a lot of choice in how your fridge looks a lot of times. So yeah, I mean, and then I label things. My label is usually just what it is and then the date. So, you know, if I was doing like that Pichu granite in the freezer, maybe, you know, maybe I would, because that's a big word, I'd probably like consolidate a little bit, like maybe CSG or something like that. And then today's date and just pop it in there. And that's another way, you know, so you can even be like, maybe you have different batches of kimchi. It's like our first in, first out. Which ones do I need to use first? Oh, all right, that. And then when somebody like doesn't put them away the right way, you have an excuse to yell at them. They have to feel terrible about themselves. And that's really what every human wants. It's just to like feel powerful. No, don't do that. Just do it with your kids, not people you work with.
Is there anyone else? So we have just Zooming here. Anyone on Zoom who has any questions? You can put it in the chat.
Do you pickle fish at all, Garrett?
What's that?
Do you pickle fish?
I haven't. I personally love pickled fish. I haven't pickled fish. It's not just mainly because I just haven't. I've smoked a lot of fish. You know, smoking and curing, that's a whole nother avenue of preservation. Ancient, awesome, like especially with seafood, especially around here. But me personally, yeah, the pickling of the fish, I haven't done, although that's not quite true. So escabeche is essentially pickled fish. You know, escabeche, there's a bunch of different names, but it's all like based on the same idea of like, you know, frying fish and pouring a very acidic, you know, liquid, usually like pepper, you know, there's vegetables in there as well. You pour that over the fried food, you let it sit, cool overnight, and then you come back to it the next day and perfectly preserved. I was actually talking with one of my partners about that specific thing, potentially down the road, getting on the menu with like finger mackerels or local sardines, that type of thing. It's very Portuguese. It's not just Portuguese, but there's like he had a name for it, like Vindals, something like that. It really piqued my interest, because like that is cool. And it's another ancient way that people were preserving food, and I guess a lot of Portuguese hunters around here will bring it out. They're sitting all day, and they're just eating like these fish by the tails, and just, you know, it out. How it doesn't scare the deer away, I don't really know, but so anyway, everything has cleaned itself open, right? I threw in, and you guys saw me do this as well. And this isn't like the best tool to do this with. Only I would have pulled out all the shellfish, and then you would have been left with like the kimchi and the broth. You add the butter and let that emulsify in. And the reason I'm adding the butter is once again to cut the salinity, okay? Because kimchi, clam juice, like, and then if you're not paying attention, you can reduce that down, and you're going to get an inevitably salty thing. So now the butter in there is to help add some fat, you know, to round everything out, make it delicious, make it so that you can eat a lot of it, which is what you want to do.
Did you use a steamer?
What?
Or did you use a steamer, or did you just put everything on?
I just put it all in there, but you couldn't. So yeah, now I mean, you can just load it up, clams, and smell it. Smells pretty awesome. And this is like a very interactive dish. This is like a very fun thing to do. And make sure that I thought I forgot a ladle, and I thought they might have one here, but they don't. So this is not the best way to do this, all right? A little bit of broth. And then once again, you could at this point just throw some fresh pea shoots on top of there. However, me always trying to make things harder. I just took pea shoots and I took canola oil and I blended them together, and I added just a touch of salt, and I didn't purposely add any acid to this, partly because once you add acid to this, it's going to go brown. Eventually it's going to go brown. It's not going to happen right away, but you've probably seen this. So like when you're, a lot of times with making herb pestos or salsa verdes or the snack, you season it right before you're about to use it. That way it'll still stay vibrant green, But if you were to season this and then put it in the fridge, it's gonna start to go brown, you know, pretty quickly. So that's kind of like a restaurant trick. It's like a lot of things are just seasoned right before they're gonna be used, you know, right before service. We'll squeeze some lemon juice in our batch of pesto, make sure that it's all tasted, and then go. So, but this, so the I liked it was pea shoots, just like the ones you saw, and oil. Enough oil to make the pea shoots blend, okay? Didn't blend it for too long, because if the blender gets hot, the pea shoots get hot, they'll brown. So you gotta be pretty quick with it. If you're doing large batches, you can use ice cubes to cool things down. But anyway, essentially made a pea shoot salsa verde, and you could freeze this, and it would keep so long. You could just put it in the fridge, and as long as there's like a layer of oil on top, it would preserve very, very long. We're not getting into what using oils and fats as preservatives, that's a whole other thing as well. And then just taking this and just sprinkling around on top for, once again, like a little seasonal freshness. So we took local lambs, we took local kimchi, you know what I'm saying, but that had been preserved long ago. And then we have like the fresh pea shoots, you bring it all together. It's just like, and it's this time of year. And you know, if you wanted, you could even like, yeah, you could take some of that pickled celery over there, chop it up, and throw it in there. It's like, you know, whatever weird thing you're into. And I can, yeah. So,
Yay.
Okay, this is torture.
yeah.
This is so mean.
Well, that was my intention. And I know, we got a couple bowls here. You guys are more than welcome to eat anything here, take anything here for your house. You can see if I'm full of SHIT, you know, when you go home. This is terrible. Class is worthless. But no, I thank you all very much for your time. Does anybody have any questions, concerns?
Yeah, but unrelated to this stuff, but I grow a lot of raspberries,
Huh?
they have lots of large seeds.
Yeah.
Is there a tool other than a sieve? Because I
Yeah.
make, tell me.
No, there isn't. There isn't, you know what I'm saying? It's just, yeah, you just gotta push it through. That's the thing. I mean, especially from a restaurant's perspective, there are certain things that I don't use because they're too labor intensive. It's just like to pay somebody, you know, to do certain things. It's just I can't have it.
Rose hip jam.
Yeah, exactly. Rose hip jam. You know what I'm saying? There's a reason it's only made in small batches.
Yeah.
Like, you know, that's